Everybody, welcome to our second episode of our video series of Ask Me Anything. And if we're being honest, this is the second time recording our second episode because we had a wee bit of a technology failure earlier. So we are doing this again. So it's going to work flawlessly. You're going to love it. You're just going to feel incredibly confident and all those things. Yeah. So we're speaking that into existence. We're manifesting that.
Indeed.
So today we're going to do two questions. It'll be a slightly shorter video, but as we said earlier in the previous video from a couple weeks ago, we'll be releasing this video every single week. So there'll be another one next week engaging two more questions and then two more questions because you all keep submitting amazing questions, and you don't have to cease submitting them. So if there's something you want to interact with on this video, make sure to put it in the comments of the chats of this video, and we will respond to those in future dates. If you have other questions you want us to answer, this is an open door invitation. Email myself or Amy, Shane or Amy at hburrow.org, and we will pick those up in later videos. And so, yeah, with that, I think we're ready to go.
All righty. So question number one. It is both fun and deeply meaningful. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Is there baseball in heaven? More seriously, if we make it to heaven, what should we expect?
All right. So caveat as I answer this, and this is actually something we were talking about a little bit before going on air here. I'm going to make reference to ideas in scripture, but I'm not a proof texter. And by proof texter, I mean giving you lots of little individual citations, because I think in general, theology is better done in a narrative sense as part of a larger picture. So while there certainly are biblical references or certain things that go with this, I don't always cite them as proof text because I think it sometimes can lead us to misinterpret things. So that being said, the notion of heaven, I think, has at times in our society has two sort of competing notions. They're not against each other, but people tend to maybe emphasize one over the other. The first one is this idea of heaven as this eternal state of like perfect static praise. Mm-hmm. So you may have heard this one say it was like an endless worship service or an endless concert where, we're all singing together and we're in this one huge mass crowd singing. And certainly the image of that is there. You find that in Revelation, right? The before the throne singing praise. You see the roots of that, particularly when we talk about heaven as a physical space, often manifested as streets of gold. And the image that comes to your mind when people say this is, little angels on clouds. It's not a fully fleshed out image, but that's one. So most people, when they say go to heaven, they may be thinking something like that. So that's one image of the afterlife. And there are certainly foundational texts that we would point to say, okay, here in the Bibles where we find some of these ideas. Maybe not the little angels with wings on clouds, but
the precious moments.
Yeah, the precious moments. Yeah. But the second one would be the idea that the afterlife is actually a resurrected life. And this is the one more grounded in, I would argue, the language of Jesus and early church traditions. So a great reference point for this is a wonderful book. It is deep, it is big, but it is approachable, called Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright. He's a British theologian. He's sort of really middle of the road, wonderful theologian. We've read a lot of his stuff before. Surprised by Hope. I'll put a link there in the show notes about this. But he lays out the case that in that book that resurrection is the hope of Christianity, not heaven. Mm-hmm. And so in that, you also see this in Revelation too, the new heaven, the new earth. We hear this in the language in both the Old Testament and the New about having resurrected bodies that can run without growing faint. This idea that life with God, where the two spheres are merged. So the two spheres, the heavenly sphere and the earthly sphere. I think the best way to explain this would be the ancient temple in Jerusalem was often seen as the one place on earth where both the holy and the heavenly realm, the kingdom of God, can coexist with the earthly realm. And there in the holy, it was the one place where our impurity wouldn't chase God off, mm-hmm. and God's holiness wouldn't kill us, for lack of a better term. So the idea, particularly with Jesus and the power of the resurrection and the tearing of the veil, is that these spheres are now in the process of merging or is porous, right? That's the phrase people often use. It's porous. And so when we talk about Jesus's return and ultimately the afterlife, N.T. Wright lays out the case that when we die, we go to paradise, which is a very technical term for soul sleep, as some have called it, this place where God holds on to all that we are. And ultimately, we are resurrected with new perfect bodies and then live out life, very much life as we know it here, just without the bad stuff,
Right.
and eternally. So those are competing notions. Now, I tend to be someone who talks about the second one more because I think the importance of the resurrection is profound. But when I said at the beginning, they're competing, but not really competing, both of these, to be fair, are largely metaphorical in the sense that we don't fully have fleshed out details of what it is. It's trying to say to someone, and very much like I'm trying to say to you, what is perfect life with God like?
Okay.
I don't know. And so even the idea of streets of gold, this never ending, praise service, that's just holy imagination. That's not some divinely given thing. That's holy imagination trying to imagine what that's like. And so in the same way, because we're taught we will be resurrected like Jesus, we also have to imagine that along with those promises. And so this is where I've grown convinced here recently. I've heard some people talk about we've kind of stopped imagining what that life will be. And there's some people, you've heard some pastors or other theologians talk about what that imagined future would be like in really interesting terms. I know I've heard in some sermons or two, but by and large, it's not something we talk about a lot, and we limit our imagination. So to answer the question, is there going to be baseball in heaven? Yes. Beyond, I don't know. I don't know beyond that. It's, this is why Christianity is a faith grounded in hope, that it is our hope, it is our belief that God will keep us safe, and that which God has breathed into us will return to God, and we are safe in that. And so because the way we understand the world, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. I can only be me with a corporeal body.
Mhm.
I tend to think the afterlife involves me having a body. That raises a million questions too. Baseball, I don't know how you compete egoless without an ego.
Right.
How do you love your neighbor as yourself when you're competing? I don't know. That's interesting. There's really interesting thoughts in that. But we don't spend a lot of time exploring that, and for whatever reason, we've not given each other permission to do that. So, I would say that's a challenging one. But our hope is that we are safe in God's hands, whether that be on a cloud, on a street of gold, in a fairway playing golf. I don't know what that is, but I think we're encouraged to imagine what that future fully in the presence of God is like.
Wonderful. All righty. Question 2, moving right on.
All right.
All right. Question 2. What's the deal with the rapture? I grew up hearing it referenced so many times, and it's hard for me to get my head around it.
Okay.
Same?
Yeah. Well, I will argue this one in some ways might be easier because I feel like this one has a firmer answer. And there's a good reason you have your trouble wrapping your head around it. So I want to provide a little bit of context, I think, understand something that happens in Christianity. So early Christians, I preach about this a lot, early Christians fully expected Jesus to return in their lifetime, which gave them a sense of urgency, which was embedded into their beliefs and practices, which tend to focus on perseverance, enduring, trials and tribulations, enduring those things and remaining faithful in that, but also being united as a community, because that's the only way you can make it through. So you can see this pop up in often very strange things that are said. And I think I would challenge anyone to read Paul's understanding of the sexual ethic and not think some of that is strange. Paul doesn't regard marriage as anything important. It's preferable to be single. That's if you believe Jesus is coming back in your lifetime, what's the point? What's the point of marriage? And so he has strange views on that, remain single. Those who get married are the people that just need sex in order to control their passions. prophylactically. And so it's not about love. It's not about procreation. It's not about any of those things we would describe as being part of marriage and sexual relationships. It's just for this passionless way to sort of keep yourself under control, which is so interesting. But if it's within the idea that Jesus is coming back, it begins to make a little more sense. So in Matthew, we do see Jesus telling the disciples and others that this generation will not pass away until he comes again. So, for some good reason, they believed he was coming back. That informed their theology. We see these principles play out in books of Revelation and Daniel, which are we known as apocalyptic texts describing current events, current as in ancient current events, in fantastical ways to encourage people to be faithful and united. So this idea that there's a belief that Jesus is going to come again in your lifetime, that wasn't unique to that first century. Now, it was unique in the sense that many of them saw Jesus and talked to someone who saw Jesus. But just the belief in the abstract is not unique. It's something that sort of happens over and over again. So, as early as the second century, there were these people called the Monanists who believed that the New Jerusalem that was described in Revelation will actually come down in this plain near Thyatira in Turkey. I actually talk about this in my 7 Churches of Revelation series, which I'll put a link in there so you can see that. And this happens multiple times. I don't want to go through all of them history, but I want to get to this one, which is the important one. Then we're going to fast forward to the 1800s. So 1770 years at least.
It's been a minute.
After the ministry, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. We're going through this time of religious reawakening in the United States, in England. And there's a man named John Nelson Darby who begins to popularize a very specific set of beliefs about what signals the end of time. And sort of the underpinning of those beliefs is certain prophecies contained in Revelation and maybe even in places like Daniel are not ancient authors describing their current events in fantastical ways, but they are in fact prophecies that are to come.
Right.
And so we need to look out for those things. And it was a really big deal because anytime there's turmoil in the world, it creates opportunity to potentially try to find meaning in ways that ultimately don't make sense. So here's this very broad outline. I'm not going to get into this because you'll see at the end why. They believe that at a moment in time, faithful Christians will suddenly disappear. Okay. Then people debated where they go to heaven or other places. But ultimately, most people say, well, they disappear, the faithful are taken, and they go straight to heaven. But those who are left behind they're there for 7 years of tribulation on earth before Jesus returns for that final judgment. Okay, so those 7 years are also an opportunity for those left behind to become faithful by the time Jesus returns, which I've always thought a strange theology, because if a bunch of people disappeared and you had this writing about it, you would think that would be everyone. So in many ways, maybe people who believe in the rapture are universalists. Who knows? But so, like I said, this worldview interprets much of Revelation and other parts of the Bible as prophecy that's yet to be filled. So what Darby has done is he's taken a couple different verses, some from Matthew, some from Thessalonians, and he sort of slapped them together with his unique perspective and created this idea that faithful Christians will disappear and there'll be this time of tribulation, rapture. That's the rapture comes from specifically from Matthew, that taken away, snatched away. So the most prominent of these, and the one where we literally get the word, is from Matthew 24. So I'm going to read this from the Common English Bible, and I'm also going to put it there on the screen so you'll be able to see it. So I'm picking up in Matthew 24, 36 through 44. But no one knows when the day or hour will come, not the heavenly angels, not the Son, only the Father knows. As it was in the time of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the human one. Now pay attention here. In those days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. They didn't know what was happening until the flood came and swept them away. The coming of the human one, Jesus, would be like that. At the time, there will be 2 men in a field, one will be taken, the other one left. 2 women will be grinding at a mill, one will be taken and the other left. Therefore, stay alert. There's that idea of perseverance. stay alert. You don't know what day the Lord is coming. So I'm not going to finish out the rest of it there, but those key verses are sort of like 39 through 41. And I want to point something out here. In the story of Noah, is it better to be Noah, who is prepared, or the people that weren't and were taken away?
I would go with Noah.
Yeah, I would go with Noah as well. Okay. So it stands to reason Jesus, in teaching using that metaphor, when he starts saying the next part, the coming of the human one will be like that. At a time, there will be two men in the field. One will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding at a mill. One will be taken, the other left. It stands to reason for me and anyone who studies the Bible, it's better to be the person not taken because you're prepared. But Darby did not see it like that because he took a couple verses here and a couple verses there and created this crazy theory out of this. And I can't tell you why. I mean, I think we talked last time a little bit about it was a time of religious awakening with these campfire meetings, often in very rural settings because people were expanding and growing into the country. And there's an element of that, maybe that just fueled it, maybe less checks and balances to be like, hey, let's slow down here. I mean, a very well-known, especially to Baptists, Charles Spurgeon, someone who was a contemporary at the time, was highly critical of Darby. So, but for whatever reason, this was popularized often in very like fundamentalist churches. So he's, I don't know how to say it other than the rapture is not anything you need to wrap your head around because it's nonsense. It is complete and utter nonsense. And the final part I want to put to this is, don't give an inch of your headspace to anyone that's trying to scare you or to manipulate you by saying they've decoded the Bible and they know when Jesus is coming back and it's April 12th at 6 a.m. Don't give a headspace to that because for people that often will view themselves as biblical literalists who do this, are not paying attention to their own text, they assume to take literally. Because verse 36 that we literally read, Jesus is saying this, but nobody knows when the day or hour will come, not the heavenly angels and not the Son, only the Father knows. So no one knows except God the Father. So certainly Billy Bob, who's read his Bible and decoded that every 20 words there's a Greek aleph, and then we're going to whatever that proves a certain day does it. That's not the way this works. The whole point of all these verses is not to clue you in when it's going to happen, but it's the same goal as Revelation. Any of these things are help you to be persistent, to persevere, to remain faithful, even in the midst of difficult times, even in the midst of questioning, and also for us to be united as a community. So there's nothing to understand because it's nonsense. I'm sure you'll meet some people that find a lot of time and effort put into this and really value it. In fact, over the weekend, there were a lot of people that believed it was that the whole thing on TikTok. Thousands and thousands of people believed the rapture was either happening Saturday or Monday. And it's Wednesday and you're here, you're watching this. So I guess it didn't happen. They didn't know. How many times is this going to happen, folks? Let's let go of this idea. That's not the point of it at all. Anything to add, Amy?
Yep. Okay.
I want to ask you a question now. What can I ask you? What can I ask? I don't know. I've ran out of ideas. So we'll be back next week with another couple questions. Submit them, ask questions. But we really thank you for joining us. Have a great week. See you guys.
Bye.